Hamas must not, should not use a place like a hospital as a shield for their presence.
Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Al-Shifa hospital.
Hello, welcome to Brass Tacks. It's been over 40 days since this war between Israel and Hamas began. Right now, much of the focus of the battlefield seems to be around the al-Shifa hospital, which is the biggest hospital in Gaza City. Israel says this is the de facto headquarters of Hamas, that Hamas has tens of hundreds of tunnel networks underneath the hospital, and the entire Hamas leadership is working from underneath that hospital. On the other hand, the Palestinians are saying that that's not the case. This is the biggest hospital. Not only is it treating patients who are in need of critical care, it is also taking care of prematurely born babies, pregnant women, that it is now, in the last month or so, become a big refugee camp for those who are fleeing the war and do not know where to go. What are the chances that Israel might actually go ahead and strike the hospital? There are firefights reportedly already taking place inside the compound. And beyond the current round of fighting, where does this story head? What happens to the day after this war is over? And what is the military objective that Israel has outlined? Is it achievable or not? And militarily, even if it achieves it, what happens diplomatically? What happens domestically? These are questions that we will be putting to Avi Hyman. He's an Israeli government spokesperson, somebody who is considered very close to the incumbent leadership there of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you very much, Mr. Hyman, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Let me start off by asking you about the current situation of the war. Much of the focus seems to be around the al-Shifa hospital. What is it that you can share with our viewers as to what is the current status there? What is the intended operation? Because clearly there's a lot of pressure on Israel. In the international community, the United States are all saying that attacking a hospital would go against the Geneva Conventions. It would go against the rules of war. Can you tell us what is the focus of the Israeli government, particularly when it comes to the fighting around this hospital?
Firstly, let me thank you very much for having me on. And I want to just say to the people of India, thank you for your continued support, both on a government level and on a people-to-people level. We see your support, we feel your support, and we appreciate your support. We know that India has faced terror in the same way that Israel faces terror, and we thank you for your steadfast support. As far as what's going on today on the ground, it's an ongoing situation, so I can't speak to specifics. What I can tell you is the al-Shifa hospital is home to Hamas's control and command center. Deep underground, Hamas built their command and control center. There, they have planned, they have initiated, and they have moved forward with the war as we see it. Over 10,000 rockets have been fired at Israel. We saw what happened on October 7th, the massacre, when their people plowed through our borders, going house to house, looking for Jews to kill, killing everyone in their path. They slit the throats of babies. They beheaded babies. They riddled babies' cribs with bullets. And now they are cynically saying to the world that we are coming after their hospitals, those same hospitals in which they have embedded their military operation. So in the Shifa hospital, we entered this morning. In accordance with international law, we informed the authorities at the hospital that we were coming in. We went into a very specific area. We did encounter fire from Hamas terrorists there. We took out a number of Hamas terrorists. We have found weapons caches, definitive proof that these people are doing everything in their power to break all laws of war, fighting from within a hospital, using their own civilians as human shields. This is a double war crime of shooting at civilians from civilians. We will not allow Hamas. We will not allow Hamas to behead our babies, and we will not allow Hamas to cynically use their babies as a political ploy on the altar of ISIS.
Mr. Hyman, you have seen the comments that have come from the international community, from the United Nations Secretary General. You've seen even President Biden's comments saying that he doesn't expect hospital wards to become theaters of firefights. What is Israel doing? What are the precautions you are taking to try and avoid mass casualties of civilians who are holed up inside that hospital, or patients who are in need of critical care?
So like I said, this is a very surgical action that we took in a very specific part of the hospital. We need to deal with the terror threat emanating from that hospital. Yesterday, we took the international media to one of your partner stations, CNN in America, broadcast the al-Rantisi hospital, a children's hospital that had a network of tunnels underground where we found explosive belts, suicide belts, weapons, caches of weapons. But more concerning was a room there where it would appear our hostages had been held. But not only men and women, because we know that they have 239 Israelis and over 30 infants. What we found there will shake the heart of any father or mother watching.
Okay.
We found an open packet of nappies that had been used for a baby, we assume a hostage. We found multiple babies' bottles that seemed to have been tossed on their way out of that room. And we saw clear evidence of chairs with ropes around them where they appear to have held hostages. So again, this is a crime against humanity. Not only taking hostages, not only taking children, infants, babies, a baby of 9 months old, but holding those hostages under a children's hospital. This is the brutal enemy that we're up against. We will not stop until we dismantle Hamas, we dismantle their military operation, we dismantle their governance of Gaza, and we free Gaza from Hamas. That is the mission.
Talking about those hostages, there are still over 200 of them who are in the custody of Hamas, and there were reports just a few days ago that there were negotiations going on. They had agreed to release some of the hostages, a majority of them women and children, in lieu of some kind of a pause, some kind of a temporary ceasefire, if you will. What light can you shed on that?
Well, I need to differentiate between two things. The first thing is the term ceasefire. My Prime Minister has made it very clear that a ceasefire at this point in the war would be surrender, would enable Hamas to rearm, to move around, to prepare and plan the next stage. And what is the next stage? Well, we only need to listen to Hamas themselves. They have said in public interviews that they will gladly do October 7th again, and again. We will not allow that to happen. So we are moving forward with the operation to dismantle Hamas.
What happens after that? Militarily, you might be able to dismantle Hamas, but can you dismantle them, A, ideologically, and B, what takes the place of that vacuum? What takes the place of Hamas? Has this been thought through?
Well, the day after Hamas, and we hope that that day will come sooner rather than later. The day after Hamas, Gaza will look very different. It'll be fully demilitarized. It'll be fully de-radicalized. Israel will have to retain security control, as my Prime Minister has said. However, the civilian rule over there, that will have to be decided. What we know is two things. Hamas will no longer be in charge of the Gaza Strip because there will be no Hamas. And the Palestinian Authority has proven over history that they cannot be in charge of the Gaza Strip. Not as bad as the way that they're holding our people hostage, but it is not a free place to live. They could have created the Miami of the Middle East. Instead, they created one of the world's largest, if not the world's largest, underground terror bases that they use to attack our civilians, to kill, to maim men, women, and children. We cannot allow an ISIS-like organization on our southern border. We will deal with Hamas, ISIS, in the same way that the free world dealt with ISIS in Afghanistan and Iraq.
What exactly do you mean by that Israel will have security control of the Gaza Strip? Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned that in some of his interviews recently as well, but the United States has made it very clear that it does not intend Israel to be an occupying force. When you say security control, does that necessarily mean Israeli troops in Gaza once this war is over?
So I appreciate the question, but it's a little bit like asking the particulars of the Marshall Plan before D-Day. We haven't got to that day yet. And when that day comes, there's plenty of very, very smart people in Israel that will work out the exact details. One thing we know for sure is we will never again allow those savages to cross over our borders and slaughter our children. We will never again allow a scenario like that of yesterday when missiles rained down from Gaza on Tel Aviv. There is an Israeli in hospital today in critical condition from shrapnel that fell on a missile in Tel Aviv yesterday. I myself had to run for cover in Tel Aviv yesterday. We cannot allow that situation to continue, and thus Israel will have to have security control. We will work out the details when we get there.
What about the civilian control? You're saying Hamas clearly, in your view, will not exist or will cease to exist. That's the stated objective of this operation. You think Palestinian Authority is incapable of ruling Gaza from past evidence. Something has to take its place. What may that be?
I will leave that to the Palestinian people. Like I said, we will need to look at the whole situation differently, because we've seen what the Palestinian Authority brought us. It brings us the pay-for-slay policy, where the more Jews you kill, the more money you get in a lifetime pension for your family. We see the education system in the Palestinian Authority, which raises their children to hate our children. We want peace. We seek peace. We have tried to make peace multiple times. We gave them Gaza on a silver platter, and we got missiles in response.
Are you also envisaging two things? One, some kind of an international peacekeeping force once this operation is over. And two, are you envisaging the northern part of Gaza, which is where the Israeli Defense Forces currently are, as some kind of a buffer land or buffer zone once this operation is concluded?
My Prime Minister has made it clear, and I'll make it clear again, that Israel will need to retain security control for the safety of our men, women, and children.
But what does that mean? Does that mean a buffer zone? Does that mean an international peacekeeping force? What does that exactly entail?
Again, what did the Marshall Plan look like before D-Day? I can't answer those questions directly.
All right.
Because I don't know the answers.
And what would you say to the international community? You're seeing protests against Israel in much of the Western world, in London, in Paris, in New York. They're saying this is a disproportionate response. Israel had the moral high ground in the aftermath of the October 7th terror attacks. How worried are you that that moral high ground might be slipping?
Well, let me say very clearly that if you were with us when we were the victim, be with us when we are the victor. We look at these protests in a very worrying manner. When we see people marching through the streets of London and elsewhere around the world, chanting things like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Free of what? Free of Jews. That is a call for policide, the eradication of a nation state, the one and only Jewish state. It is a call for genocide, for the genocide of my people, the Jewish people in Israel. But I'll go one further than that, because people need to understand what they're marching for and what they're marching with. The Hamas Charter is very, very clear. First, they will eradicate the state of Israel, and then they will go after Jews everywhere. So when people are going to march supposedly for pro-peace, pro the Palestinian people, they need to understand that you can't be marching in support of an ISIS-like organization, in support of genocide of the Jewish people. We say never again. Never again is now.
And one final word before I let you go. So does this mean at the end of this war, and perhaps because of the attack that spawned this war, the two-state solution is now dead?
Well, we'll see what happens when we get there. But from what we've seen from Gaza, a scenario where the Palestinians were just yards away, they could run through the borders and butcher our people. When you talk about Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, which towers over Tel Aviv and 70% of our population, I'll leave you to answer those questions. Again, I don't know what the future will bring. What I know is that our mission is to dismantle Hamas, is to dismantle their military and governance over Gaza, to free the people of Gaza, and to bring home those 239 Israeli hostages being held against all the laws of war. That is our mission, and that is what we will do.
All right. Avi Hyman, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So as Israel faces the heat for its operations in Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu has tweeted, and this is part of our Motorola, India's best 5G smartphone brand's tweet of the day.
Hello, Moto.
This is what the Israeli Prime Minister has said, and I quote, "It is not Israel that is deliberately targeting civilians, but Hamas that beheaded, burned and massacred civilians in the worst horrors perpetrated on the Jews since the Holocaust." Now, while Israel is doing everything to keep civilians out of harm's way, Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way. Now, Israel provides civilians in Gaza humanitarian corridors and safe havens. Hamas prevents them from leaving at gunpoint. It is Hamas and not Israel that should be held accountable for committing a double war crime, targeting civilians while at the same time hiding behind civilians. The forces of civilization must back Israel in defeating Hamas barbarism. All right, let's go straight across to our big debate. Does the al-Shifa hospital raid expose Hamas's human shield theory, or is it a sign of excesses by the Israeli Defense Forces? That's our debate topic tonight.
Hello, Moto.
All right, Danny Ayalon is a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, and Dalal Irikat is a columnist who supports the Palestinian cause and Palestine. Let me start with you, Dalal Irikat. You just heard from Avi Hyman, who is the Israeli Prime Minister's advisor and spokesperson. You also heard from Netanyahu himself saying that if Israel is accused of attacks against civilians and violation of the Geneva Conventions in this target of the al-Shifa hospital, what would you say of Hamas using human shields and Hamas deliberately holding people in that hospital without allowing them to flee? Isn't that too a war crime?
Thank you very much. Well, I'll start with Netanyahu's headline as he's bringing the Holocaust back to our scenes in 2023. The Holocaust is the saddest tragedy, the human tragedy of the 20th century. And yes, never again for all of humanity, never again for all religions, all colors, or ideologies. The Israeli people should be the first ones to be ashamed of the Israeli military occupation, raids and incursions and shellings and bombings of civilians. Going back to the hospital, yes, the Israeli investigation intelligence have been working so hard, putting a lot of effort and investments to produce what they had brought to the world to justify, targeting the hospitals and the civilians and the patients in Gaza. Thank you. This is their own investigation, internal investigation. I want to speak now to the minds of the Indian audience and to the minds of any conscious people. There is consensus in the international system that the jurisdiction, the legal jurisdiction, the people who are entitled to rule are the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court, Karim Khan and his investigation teams are very ready. They actually flew to the border. Netanyahu did not let them in. If we want to respect accountability, and I am for accountability for anybody who commits any crimes, if we want to hold Hamas or Netanyahu or anybody, or if we want to label them as criminals, then we have to let in and we have to accept a civilized, peaceful and legal tool, and to let a third party.
No, but ma'am, are you suggesting that Hamas has not built tunnels under the hospital, that Hamas is not using civilians as human shields, that it's not holding people at gunpoint? I mean, forget about its own people at gunpoint. There are 200 plus hostages that Hamas has in its custody. And it's been over a month. It's been 40 days now. Why didn't they release them as a goodwill gesture? And then perhaps the Israeli side and the international community will meet them halfway for whatever their demands are. But to say that any organization which still has human hostages in its custody 40 days on after the horrific October 7th terror attacks that it carried out, to say that they should be judged by ICC standards or they should be judged by, international observers, I mean, that just defies logic.
That justifies logic, legal and peaceful tools. And let me tell you one thing. We cannot justify that the oppressor is actually bringing about an investigation over the oppressed. And you're speaking about a Marshall Plan. We should really, in 2023, we need wisdom. We need people who care for the strategic existence of Israel and for the peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis alike. Speaking about a Marshall Plan, we need to learn from history. We need not to repeat history, but to really avoid the atrocities that the humanity is suffering. There are more than 1,000 Palestinian kidney failure patients in Gaza who cannot do dialysis because of the shortage of fuel. There are 9,000 Palestinian cancer patients in Gaza who cannot get their treatment. More than 130 premature babies.
Let me ask Danny Aylon this. Danny Aylon, it's not correct to expect that Israel be held to the same standards as that of an avowed terrorist organization. Israel is a responsible member of the Committee of Nations, is a member of the United Nations. It has to abide by the rules of war. And the rules of war, the Geneva Conventions, are absolutely clear. No civilian in any direct fashion should be targeted. And targeting a hospital is a war crime.
Well, I will tell you that this is actually the easiest debate I've ever been to. It's almost embarrassing because it's a no-brainer. First of all, you have all the evidence. Dalal is talking about some inquiry. It's not Israel. We have the international press seeing what we see. So how can you deny that Hamas has not turned Gaza into one big bunker holding hostages and human shields 2 million people of Gaza? How can you not see that the underground bunkers and tunnels under hospitals, under mosques, this is all evident. I don't think we even have to debate it. It's embarrassing to even talk about it. It's a fact. Now, when you talk about Geneva Convention, then what the war crime is not only to shell civilians, as the Hamas does indiscriminately, shelling on Israeli towns, but also to use individuals and civilians as human shields. This is what the Hamas is doing. So if Hamas is taking a hospital and making it a bunker and a military target from which they launch missiles, from which they shoot at our soldiers, it becomes, listen to that, according to the Geneva Convention, it becomes a legitimate military target. Even though Israel did not indiscriminately bomb the Shifa, we did not go down and ruin it. We went in a very painstaking way, in a very precise operation, which put our soldiers at risk. And this is what we're doing. We're routing out the evil of the terror of Hamas, which is like ISIS. And they have no shame of going into hospitals, taking patients, taking babies in incubators.
But Mr. Aylon, I come back to that point. Israel has to hold a higher standard. You cannot expect a nation state that is part of the Committee of Global Nations, a responsible member, to be held to the same standard as that of a terrorist organization, avowedly. The point is that the Geneva Conventions are very clear. You cannot target civilians in a direct fashion. And there is also the Convention of Proportionality. Yes, 1,400 Israelis died. And, we here in India were the first ones to join you in this hour of grief. We know what it means to lose people to terrorism. But that does not mean that the Israeli forces go in, and as per the Ministry of Health in Gaza, their estimates is that 10,000 people have died, a majority of them women and children.
So let me mention that this Ministry of Health, the so-called Ministry of Health in Gaza, is under Hamas' hands. Hamas perpetrated a coup d'etat and they threw out the Palestinian Authority in 2007. And they have turned Gaza into a terror entity and into a place where they are killing people, their own and also ours. So Geneva Convention is very clear again. I will take you, I'm not comparing myself or Israel into the terrorists. Of course, they are despicable. But you have countries like the United States, like the Allied, the UK and others who acted in Fallujah and Mosul in Iraq in a way which was, I said to say, much more brutal than the IDF. They took out hospitals, therefore, and it was all according to the Geneva Convention. Again, I say, when the terrorists make a hospital into a military bunker, it becomes a legitimate target. And even though Israel is not targeting it indiscriminately, we are not bombing it. We are not throwing bombs from the air. We are not using artillery. We're going very, very precisely, taking a lot of risk for our own soldiers. And if you see, all the casualties on the other side were of terrorists. We came in with
Dalal Arikat, what about, I come back to that question of hostages. If Hamas was sincere that it wants peace with Israel, that it wants to, end this airstrike and this ground operation that Israel has been in since October 7th, since October 8th, there is a proposal by the Qatari government, mediated by the Qatari government. There are reports all over the media about this, about release of certain hostages. Why doesn't Hamas, as a goodwill gesture, put forth the absolute innocent hostages who it's holding for 40 days now?
Well, I'm not here to speak on behalf of Hamas. I'm here to speak on behalf of my people, the civilians, the 2.3 million Palestinian civilians who are under the Israeli shelling and bombardments and rockets, Mr. Danny. Yes, for 40 days. And now you're talking about terrorism? Israel is a state-organized terror. We have been suffering under a framework of Israeli military occupation for 75 years. 75 years of continued documented war crimes of apartheid, confiscations of lands, settlements, extrajudicial killings. And guess what? Today, we are facing documented settler terror, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank. On daily basis. In the past 4 weeks, we have had around 200 Palestinian souls targeted and killed in the West Bank.
But Ms. Arikat, how does any of that justify what happened on the 7th of October? How does any of that justify kidnapping grandmothers and beheading babies? Thank you very much.
Listen, I'm not justifying any violence, but I'm not also accepting that the Israeli propaganda and the misleading machine of their own strategic communications can continue and can mislead the brains of the people. We are talking.
What is propaganda about those 1,400 people who died? Much of it was caught on camera. I mean, there were young people who were kidnapped from a music festival. There was an 85-year-old grandmother who was kidnapped on the back of a motorcycle. I mean, this was caught on camera. Hamas itself organized so-called journalists to capture the pictures of the people it was kidnapping.
Sir, I'm here contesting the framework that you are saying it's an Israel-Hamas war. This is not an Israel-Hamas war. Israel is waging a series of war crimes against 2.3 million Palestinian civilians. And let me reiterate what you just said. Article 33 of the 4 Geneva Conventions and Article 8 of the Rome Statute bluntly and clearly, straightforward, talk about the protection of civilians. Israel is the one who is committing continued war crimes against humanity. Israel must be held accountable.
So
Israel
anything that Hamas does is not a war crime. Holding babies inside hospitals, denying babies in incubators, electricity, holding people at gunpoint, none of that is a war crime. None of that would constitute a crime against humanity, according to you.
Sir, I'm saying let's invite the ICC to investigate and hold accountable all the criminals. It's not my job, and neither the Israeli government. And let me say one more thing.
Danny Aylon, I've got to get the closing comment from both of you. But Danny Aylon, it's not like the Israeli operation right now for the last 40 days is going to help solve the immediate and most proximate problem, which is, of course, the 1,400 people who died, and more importantly, the 200 plus people who are still in Hamas custody. Is there a plan as to how to retrieve them? Because in the face of this Israeli military offensive, what is the incentive for Hamas to release them at all? The longer they hold on to them, the more they become a bargaining chip, the more they become leverage.
Well, Israel said from the beginning, if this Hamas, ISIS type terror organization just unconditionally surrender, then there is no reason at all to use any violence. And this is what we seek, to free Gaza from the terror of Hamas. And you know what? When I see Dalal, I really feel badly for her, because Dalal and so many other innocent Palestinians are held hostage by a failed leadership that refused to make peace with Israel, even though Israel made so many concessions, that refused to condemn Hamas. You see, she's not even condemning Hamas. Hamas are not necessarily the Palestinians, but the Palestinians are held hostage by Hamas. Maybe Dalal is afraid to speak against Hamas because she may be in harm's way and her family as well. But the terrorists are the ones that are governing the Palestinian people. And with that, Israel will not allow to surrender.
But then what is your plan? And I asked Avi Hyman this. If you're saying Hamas has to end, and yes, militarily you might be able to achieve that objective, what replaces Hamas? Mr. Netanyahu went on television over the weekend and he said he doesn't think the Palestinian Authority would be the right replacement for Hamas. There's no Hamas, there's no PA. Then what's going to exist in Gaza? I mean, there's got to be more than vacuum, because vacuum is only going to breed another Hamas. So what exactly is the Israeli plan here?
You make a very good point. I think there will have to be some interim agreement with an international structure, maybe Arab League structure, that can bring law and order and maybe the hope of some economic prosperity into Gaza. And at some point, the Palestinians will have to govern themselves. Now, who will govern? I think there'll have to be a free elections in Gaza. But free election, that means that Hamas or any terror organizations or any militias, armed militias, cannot run for this election. This was the problem in 2006, where Hamas supposedly won an election on the basis of gunpoint and their military. In international affairs, Bosnia, for instance, 1995, after the war there was election. But before election, all militias were disarmed. So once you disarm all the terror organizations in the Palestinian Authority, in Judea and Samaria, and also in Gaza, then with a real election, then hopefully the Palestinians will throw this corrupt and ineffective government of theirs, which support terrorism. And once we have a new and changed and a peace-loving and seeking regime.
Dalal Arikat, the Israeli argument has been that they left Gaza in 2005, there were elections, and then in 2007, in a bloody coup, it was Hamas that seized power and threw out the PA. And what do they do in the last 15 years? They could have developed Gaza just like any other modern-day city, but instead all they've built is these bunkers and storehouses for ammunition and using humans as shields. That's what they've done, and that's on Hamas.
Thank you. I am a person who respects the truth and who bases her arguments on facts. So let's remind the world, and let's not continue to adopt the Israeli hasbara and propaganda. In 2005, Sharon dismantled the settlements, and he withdrew, I don't know the exact number, 6 to 9, there are conflicted data of the settlers from Gaza. Israel never seized control over Gaza. Throughout the years, and ever since they dismantled the settlements, they maintained every aspect of control from the sea, land, and air. Everybody knows that. Before October, if you wanted to visit Gaza, for example, you would ask for a permit from the Israeli authorities and not from Hamas. Again, I'm not here to defend Hamas. I'm here to tell you as a Palestinian that we have endured the injustices and the sufferings of the Israeli military occupation for 75 years. And I am a person who advocates for peace and two-state solution. Let me to also share with the world and with your audiences that the PLO had made a big concession by accepting the international community position of a two-state. We gave up 78% of mandated Palestine in our wish and intention to make peace. Again, if we want to learn from the Northern Ireland experience, let's remember that negotiations and inclusion and more comprehensive talks is what brought peace, not really shelling and bombing people.
I asked Avi Hyman about the two-state solution. He said the situation does not, right now, is not conducive for a two-state solution. So Danny Aylon, the final word, last 30 seconds. If it's not the two-state solution, then what are we going back to? Are we going back to 1967? Because clearly, I'm sure a majority of Israelis don't want that.
it will have to be a two-state solution, but two-state solutions for two people based on recognition, mutual recognition, on security, on coexistence, which we do not see from the Palestinians yet. And I really pity, you hear Dalal, this is the core issue, is that they are thinking that they are doing us a favor, recognizing our birthright to be in our own home. She says, we are there, this is our place. And we were willing to share our land with the Palestinians. By the way, never had an independent state. There was never a Palestinian people. Actually, Palestinian people rose up with the beginning of returning the Jews into Zion, into the state of Israel. So if the Dalal and her people will realize that they don't do us a favor to themselves by making peace with us, then I think we'll have a chance. And also, I would advise that they will change the curriculum in schools where they teach hatred against Jews and against non-Muslims.
Danny Aylon and Dalal Arikat, I am completely out of time. Thank you very much for joining us, you both. We really wish that this war comes to an end as quickly as possible with whatever stated objective Israel has put forth. But what replaces Hamas, or what comes the day after the war, that is something that even Israel perhaps is not thought through entirely, or has not articulated enough to the international community, as there is growing scrutiny now on what it intends to do at this al-Shifa hospital. So why is this such an important place, the al-Shifa hospital? The focus of the entire fighting in the Gaza Strip over the last 2 or 3 days has been around this hospital complex, while Israeli forces claim it's one of the nerve centers of Hamas, the headquarters of Hamas, with hundreds of tunnels beneath it. The alarm continues over civilians who are caught in the crossfire.